Hi guys, this is Bob and this is the Higher Way podcast, another journey through the madness that is my life, from art to Zen, from Parmenides to, I don't know, Pyrrho. And today we have Matt Caulfield on the hot seat. Hiya Matt.
Hiya Bob, you're right.
Matt Caulfield is an old student of mine, but don't let that put you off. We're not just going to talk about Muay Thai, are we, Matt?
No, not today. Well, we'll probably, we might end up two grumpy old men moan about the state of Muay Thai. But,
well, yeah, that's a good point. But what we'll do, rather than be grumpy about Muay Thai and the state of play and the state of Muay Thai at the moment, for the people who don't know you, I've known Matt for over 20 years now, easily over 20 years, maybe even 25 years. He turned up at my gym as a skinny young man. And I was a skinny old man. And it's 20 odd years on. So people will want to know, okay, your martial arts.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that first.
Okay, well, because martial arts, I guess martial arts led me into pretty much everything I'm interested into today.
Right.
It was guys, I remember very, very specific. I was about 8, which is now, having my own children, strikes me as a thoroughly inappropriate age. My friend Kevin Troth, who was a couple of years older than me, he was doing white crane kung fu, which you don't see white crane kung fu anywhere anymore.
No, very rare.
Disappeared. And he was 10 and he introduced me to Bruce Lee. Like I said, inappropriate age of 8. All the other kids were watching Star Wars movies. I was watching Bruce Lee, and it just kind of resonated with me. And I got interested in Bruce Lee, and I nagged my parents for a couple of years. And they eventually let me join the local kickboxing club.
Which was nothing like what Bruce Lee was doing.
No, but it was the mid-80s, it was all 86, 85, 86. So it was, kickboxing was everywhere, it was all like Howard the Hawk Brown and Bill Superfoot Wallace. It was always on the cover of Combat and all that sort of stuff. So I did kickboxing for about 4 or 5 years. So I was about 14, 15. And then I started, because again, it was geography as well, wasn't it? I lived in a place called Kidderminster. Your choice was whatever martial arts was local. So I think it was like karate, judo, bit of boxing, and then the kickboxing club. I wasn't particularly interested in judo. I gave it a go, but I'm too rangy. I'm not very good at ground fighting. I did a bit of BJJ and a bit of jiu-jitsu, but I've got long limbs. I'm better at the striking arts. I can keep people away from me. I don't know why I didn't do karate, because to be fair, it was the years of the Karate Kid. So you think I would have gone down the karate route. But
the thing is, you made a point there of sort of like, wherever you live, you just take what you can get. And I guess there wasn't that much karate in Kid.
I don't think there was. I think there might have been a Shotokan club.
Oh, okay.
But then I think it's just kickboxing was a big thing. There was a lot of films.
Oh, yeah. Well, you mentioned a couple of names there. I mean, Howard Brown. I mean, I've known Howard for donkey's years. I mean, I haven't seen him for years. So he's a small guy, but a brilliant semi-contact kickboxer.
Yeah, well, who I trained. Well, I didn't train under Howard. I trained under one of his instructors, because it was Eka, English.
Eka. I wonder if they're still going.
It was a guy called someone Dylan. I can't remember his first name, but it's a guy called someone Dylan. And so I did that 4 or 5 years. Then faffed around a little bit. Did a bit of judo with a friend of mine, Adam. Did a bit of jiu-jitsu, because there was a jitsu club in Kidderminster. And at that point, I sort of started getting interested in the Eastern, particularly Japanese philosophy. So I was kind of going down the Japanese martial arts route. And then I took a break for a few years. I met a girl, we got together. I was about 16, 17, learned to drive, got a motorbike, learned to drive. Got interested in the sort of things that 16 or 17-year-olds get interested in, gigs, concerts, going out, that sort of thing. So my martial arts kind of fell off a cliff a little bit. And then, so 2021, it was about 94, 95 I met you, I think. We kind of differ. I know it must be probably about 96 even, 95, 96. Or maybe, let's say 96.
It was mid-90s. It was mid-90s.
Definitely mid-90s. You just moved to the studio, so it was whenever you moved there.
Oh, okay, that would be 93.
Oh, I think it was a little bit after that.
93.
Oh, no, it was a few years after that, actually. It was definitely before you got the boxing. Anyway.
Did I have the boxing ring?
No, you didn't. So it was definitely mid-90s.
Yeah, it could be 94, 95.
Anyway, it was mid-90s. This is fascinating for people who don't know us, isn't it? Arguing about what date it was.
No,
So I split with this girl, as you do when you split up with anyone. You've suddenly got a massive hole in your life. I was still really mad keen on martial arts.
can I stop you there? Don't say I filled that gap.
No, I didn't. I wanted to do martial arts, and I started doing Aikido because, again, I was interested in the Eastern philosophies, you know, Zen and that sort of stuff. So I started doing Aikido. But I wanted to do a striking art. I wanted to hit things. So at the time, mid-90s, it was before Muay Thai became, you know, the lifestyle, fashionable thing that everyone does in gyms nowadays. You know, hip pads, essentially Muay Thai size. It was mystique. Everyone had heard of it in the martial arts community, but because it was famous because you could use elbows and it had clinch and it was famous for being brutal. So I did what everyone does before the internet. I bought a copy of Combat magazine.
Yeah, good old Combat.
And I opened it at the back where all the adverts were, and I saw your advert, Prior Picture in Birmingham, because obviously I was living in Redditch at the time, so not far from Birmingham, and there was you, it was Prior Picture, and then there was K-Star. And the reason I rang you, as serendipity would have it, is because you were above K-Star, which is, I love that kind of random stuff. But I am pretty much where I am today. I am where I am today in my life, most probably because your advert came above K-Star. If I've run K-Star first and gone and train with them,
the funny thing is, Paul Clifton, who was the editor of that magazine, put it in there above all the others, simply because I used to write for the magazine. He never paid me to write for the magazine. So he gave me a free advert, and he said, "I'll put it in first."
And it was a bit bigger. It was a bit bigger than.
Oh, it would have been, because that would have normally cost, I think, about £70 or £80 or something ridiculous like that. And I got it not really free because I was writing articles in that magazine. So you could have been a K-Star, or that was there was only two real Thai boxing clubs in Birmingham at the time.
So and then obviously the rest is history. I met you. We seemed to hit it off pretty well. Not just
you climbed up the roof of the gym.
Like little Hanuman. I was
like a small monkey, like a spider monkey, because it was moving some ropes or something. You went, I'll go up, and you just went. I scuttered along with a knife
in my teeth. I remember you gave me a big knife in my teeth.
Yeah, that's right. You went up. I give you a knife, and you went up and you cut that. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, you videoed it, but if the video if you ever find the little memory disc with whatever it was on,
it's got to be on there.
I don't know where it was because you just got a video camera at the time. I think you wanted me to climb up so you could film it. I think you were a budding filmmaker.
I know exactly where I got that camera from. It was one of the first JVC HD video cameras, and one of my students was, if you remember, good old was. Might get him on one day. Who knows? He's in Thailand, I believe, allegedly. And he give me one. He just gave me it. He said, "I've got 3. You can have one." And I was like gobsmacked. And that was the camera I used to film. So that camera's up in my loft. So hey, maybe I should dig it out and paste it, cut it into this.
Climbing up.
You climbing up a rope, that'd be hilarious. Anyway, so we hit it off. And you trained with me for quite really up until the present day, I guess.
You could say. You know, it's 25 years, isn't it? So so I trained. I came down the gym quite a lot. I remember I was doing private sessions.
Well, you were doing privates, and I was going to say, actually, I was going to preempt you then, because you were like, there was a small group of you guys, and because I had the gym open full time, it was like a social club.
Yeah, it was me, Marcus, Jason, F. I can't remember who else was in the early days. Steve, I can't remember his surname. Manon and Colin was there all the time.
Young,
and there was a few more I remember. And we were
there was always people. It was in and out. Spud, loads. There's a proper little group. Tom Sweetman would have been a young lad then as well.
I remember Tom. He probably doesn't remember me. I saw a picture of him recently, like you say on your Instagram, and he looks all grown up nowadays. Bless him. Took me a while to work out how I remembered him, because he was such a clean-faced little lad, and now he's all like tattoos and hair.
Little Tom. He's about 6 foot now, and he's covered in tattoos.
But yeah, so it was that. But I remember we kind of hit it off, and one of the reasons we hit it off, if you don't mind me sounding all sycophantic for a moment, one of the things you do, which is really well, is you're like an encourager. You encourage people. You get some people who are, to be honest with you, horrible to their students, but you were always a really encourager. So you had people like, it's no wonder that you do what you do now, you know, helping people with NLP and coaching and the therapy side.
Yeah.
Because you kind of had this way of finding that little nugget of that little spark and then encouraging people to do it. And I remember chatting to you during one of our private sessions, and we used to talk about all sorts of nonsense, didn't we, during those private sessions? And that's why we kind of became friends, because we were very, very similar in interest. I was
attitudes, interests, philosophy.
And I remember saying that I'd done martial arts because I wanted to get confident. I was a fairly shy little boy. I didn't really have many social skills, didn't really have many friends, didn't really know what to do myself. Everyone kept saying, oh, you want to build your confidence. Kept hearing, like, particularly my friend Kevin, I'll do martial arts, it'll build your confidence. And I went along and started doing martial arts. I found didn't make a single jot of difference. I didn't feel any more confident whatsoever at all. I could hit someone in the face, but that doesn't help when you're going for a job interview or speaking to a girl you find attractive, you know, unless you're a caveman, came over, have a club, drag them off. But so, and I remember saying this to you one day, and you said, have you heard of something called neuro-linguistic programming? And that then opened up a completely different plane of existence, and also completely responsible for how I make, well, I don't make a living nowadays, I'm a stay-at-home dad, but how I made a living, and like, we worked together.
But you still are available for
I am still available for one-to-one
groups,
sessions.
One-to-one sessions. You've got a website which we're going to have down in the description box anyway, so yeah, I
still do. What it is at the moment, I say a little bit more because of COVID and the kids have been off school and stuff. And I always take the school holidays off anyway, because what's the point in being self-employed and not taking the time off to be with your family?
True.
But yeah, so I'm not doing the group sessions obviously at the moment because I can't because of COVID, but I'm doing one-to-one work via Zoom, tuition, coaching and that sort of thing. So yeah, so that's kind of where I am at the moment. But yeah, so it was sort of the end, because we used to do practice together. What, 2003? No, 2004, 3-4. We started working together. And then we did it for about 3 or 4 years, and then and then we kind of, you did your thing, I did my thing, and then we came back together a few times to
doing joint trainings and things like that.
Bits and bobs, yeah. So it was, because I often say to people, I said I refused to admit it at the time, but kind of doing my prac trainings with you was kind of like my apprenticeship,
right?
You know, because you'd done it for quite a few years before me, so you were like really the lead trainer on the course, and I just kind of found my feet, and you sort of gave me feedback about how I was going and stuff like that. But yeah, you know, I refused to admit it at the time because I was 26 and had an ego. But looking back, you know, I'm quite happy to admit that
you didn't. I don't think it was as big as you think it was. I think you were what I found is that it was good working with you because you would just do what you were supposed to do, and add bells to it as well, rather than just because I've trained people in the past, not just in NLP. This applies to a few things, and you teach them, and you think, okay, they've got the knowledge, let them go, and have a blast at it. And what they tend to do is just repeat what you exactly what you taught them. Which is what you don't want. What you want to do with your students is get them to be better than you. That's your role as a coach, no matter what you're coaching. So what I liked about you was you'd put your own little slant on it. Because I remember sitting in the room with you the first time, and we used to share the session, didn't we? And it got. I remember the first session. I said, "Oh, you do the afternoon. I'll just sit in. And if you want any help, you know, I'm there if you need me to step in. But I probably won't." And I sat there listening. I thought, I'm going to make a cup of tea now. my work is done. Because
you're ready to leave the temple, grasshopper.
But it's funny because we've had somebody else on the podcast. If you haven't listened, Craig Galvin, I told him NLP, and I had the same responses from him. He took it on board, and then he understood the principles rather than. You know yourself, Matt, from teaching people in NLP. Now I know this is your podcast, and I'm doing a bit.
No, that's fine.
But when you're teaching NLP, you're teaching principles, not bloody just do this, do that. Now go off and do it. You're actually trying to get people to understand that there's a human being in front of you. You listen, you look, you absorb that information, you extrapolate it, and you come up with a plan. But that plan is flexible. Sadly, and you know this to be true, a lot of practitioners really just have one plan. I'm going to do the phobia cure. I'm going to do the swish pattern, you know, and it's like and they use scripts in hypnosis.
There's nothing, I think it's Michael Breen said, and it's a bit mean, but his sentiment is correct. If you need a script to tell you what to say and you're not an actor, you're an idiot. But that's
Michael Breen. Now, Michael Breen, just explain who Michael Breen is.
Oh, yes. Michael Breen, he's a master trainer of NLP. He's an American guy in New York, comes from the consultancy world, trained with worked together with Paul McKenna in the 90s, and they brought Richard Bandler, who's the co-creator of NLP, over to the UK to run trainings for them with the McKenna Breen business. So both you and I trained with, because you told me you trained with McKenna Breen, and you said, if you're going to train in NLP at the moment in time, and it was barely any NLP, it's quite hard to say, isn't it? There was barely any NLP training in the UK at that moment. In fact, remember Bob, who came along, Sir Bob, who came along to our first course? I remember him saying that he'd done loads of Bob. It was Sir Bob. Didn't bring his lance. I was very disappointed.
I know, no knight, no armor, but he was a knight. Yeah,
he was a knight of the, we can say, by almost royal appointment.
So what did Bob say?
And he said that he was very impressed because it was the first training we'd done actually together, and it was when we'd set up the Birmingham NLP Training Academy together. Right. And he said he was really impressed because he'd done a load of research into NLP, and basically there was a few down in London, McKenna Breen being the biggest, but there's a few down there. There was a couple sort of in the south coast. There was like one in Manchester, maybe one up in Glasgow, Edinburgh way. He said, but there wasn't much around.
No.
But of course now, I think there's like 6 in Birmingham alone now. It's crazy.
All sorts of organisations, all sorts of. Well, you know that, Matt, and the politics of it is incredible. I mean, it's moved so far away from the original idea posited by Bandler that NLP should be an attitude of curiosity that leaves behind it a drill of techniques. It's become, in fact, I believe people do theoretical, like written exams in it.
Yeah. And it was, you know, Bandler was always anti-theory. But it's the one thing that really interested me because the reason I resonated with so much with NLP wasn't for the self-helpy, even though you introduced it to me as sort of the self-helpy side because it's about building confidence and that sort of thing. You lent me a few books and I started reading them, particularly the Bandler work. And I'd always recommend to anyone that's getting to NLP, you know, start with the basics, go back to the 70s,
go to the source,
into Prince's, stuff like that. Most of the stuff that comes out about NLP nowadays is essentially regurgitating that in a slightly different way anyway. And so I would always recommend going back to the Bandler stuff. And I was reading it, and the one thing that, because I'd kind of been, I had been very interested in philosophy, and just before I met you, so it would have been 1995, I got into Buddhism quite heavily. Through my teenage years, I was very into philosophy in a way that a teenager is. Read a lot, didn't really understand it, you know. could quote it. Loved a bit. I went through my Nietzsche phase. The one I'm revisiting now actually is a slight aside. I've really got back into Camus, Albert Camus. I've really got back into him, and I really get the absurdist philosophy. I think it makes particularly in the world in which we live now. I think he really.
I was going to say it fits perfectly with what's happening. It's the paradigm, isn't it? You know, what's going on at the moment.
So I've really got back into it. And I think a lot of people have, because the Plague's one of the biggest sellers at the moment and stuff like that. But, you know, people are reading the Plague because we're living through a plague. You know, they're not exactly being subtle about it.
Yeah.
And they miss the fact the Plague was actually an allegory for the Second World War. It wasn't actually about an actual. But anyway, so I read a lot of philosophy, and then when I was 19, I remember very specific. I was into sort of Eastern mysticism through the martial arts films, Monkey TV show, you know, The Water Margin, all that sort of stuff.
Great films.
And I saw the complete aside. I saw the Jamie Hewitt, David Albarn musical that they did a few years ago, you know, Monkey Journey to the West. Absolutely brilliant. It was like a rock opera they did of it, and it was absolutely superb. Anyway, So yeah, so I was into Eastern mysticism, but hadn't really I was into like the romanticism of it more than the actual philosophy of it, if that makes sense. And I was sat with a guy in a pub in Cheltenham. I'd gone there with a girl I was going out with at the time. Her friend was at university in Cheltenham, and we'd gone out for the night. And I was sat a little bit drunk in Cheltenham, and I was waffling on to this lovely friendly chap who was a friend of this girl's, saying what it is, right? What it is, I was 19, I knew everything. What it is, right, is it's like we just cling to stuff, and like when we cling to stuff, we just want it, and then we get dissatisfied with it, and there's no point in that. It's that clinging, that desire that is actually creates all unhappiness. And he went, oh, I didn't realize you're into the Buddhist philosophy. And I was going to what?
You probably thought he was some drunken Taoist master.
Well, it turned out he was
in the tradition of the Taoists. Drinking alcohol and gabbling on is a big deal.
Raya Khan is still one of my biggest heroes.
Oh, I love Raya Khan.
I used to sneak into the temples and get all like the little.
Yeah, I've got books on Raya Khan.
Yeah.
Get your breath. I've just put my eye on Cold Mountain there.
Oh yes.
And obviously. For those that don't know, but hey, maybe we'll talk about them in another podcast.
Right, Raya Khan was the guy, the monk that monks weren't allowed to get a festival, so he'd dress up as a woman to sneak into the festivals. He was a great bloke. He was like proper Zen, not this like.
And a great poet as well.
Oh, brilliant! Absolutely superb. You really got it. Anyway, so he then said to me he was an ex-monk with the Western Buddhist Order. He'd now become a lay person, so he was part of the Friends of the Western Buddhist Order. And he introduced me to my nearest group, which was Moseley.
Yeah, I remember it. Yeah.
And I remember Moseley because in 1993, I think, I saw Oasis there supporting Ocean Colour Scene. How the world changed.
Oh, man.
What was the name of the pub? What was the name of the pub? The Jug of Ale, was it? It was.
Could have been the Jug of Ale. It might have been the Fighting Cocks. No, they didn't have a music venue at the time.
I think it was the Jug of Ale, but I could be wrong. They knocked it down now or something. But anyway, yeah. So I went to the Moseley Friends of the Western Buddhist Order group, and I sat with them, did them 6-week meditation course. I couldn't get up there every week because I lived a little bit of a way away. It was quite difficult to travel. So I go like for as many regular sits as I could. And really kind of got into like the FWBO brand of well,
it was Sangha Kashita, the founder, Friends of the Western Buddhist Order. I guess it was his attempt to westernize Buddhism, take on the cultural accretions of the West, rather than trying to be an Indian or trying to be Japanese. Or
and it was bits of Tibetan, bits of Zen, bits of it was a bit of a hodgepodge, and it became a little culty. Like it's changed its name now, hasn't it? Because it got a bit of a bad reputation a few years ago.
Robert Ellis, the philosopher, has written a really good book just recently on Sangha Kashita, called Sangha Kashita, and he was an ex-FWBO guy who set up the Middle Way Society, who were really good. He was a Buddhist. Yeah, he talks about Buddhism and he's written books on Buddhism, but he's more or less he's taken the advice of the Buddha and now he's forging his own path.
Yeah, if you see a Buddha on the road, kill him. Yeah.
So if you get a chance to read Robert Ellis or look at him on YouTube, it's all free. All of his
read him actually.
Oh, Robert Ellis, good guy, really clever, really interesting guy. Very well rounded. He's a philosopher. He's written many books. Some of them are quite weighty in terms of the depth at which he goes into philosophy. He's obviously well read. He's an academic, but he has a practical way of speaking. He can make it accessible.
I'll have a look actually, because I always it's always good to get new thinkers, isn't it? It's
Middle Way Society. They had a conference. Which had some really good speakers. And it was going to be in Birmingham at the NEC because I had booked to go and see him for the day. It was a weekend, I should say. Because of COVID, it didn't happen. So they recorded it all, and it's all available.
Oh, I'll check it out, definitely.
Great. Stephen Batchelor was talking on it as well.
I was just going to say Stephen Batchelor, because he was like my next turn. Because like in 1990, I was hanging around in, I think it was Dylan's bookshop, where they don't exist anymore, do they? In Merry Hell. which is a shopping centre for people that don't know. And I saw Buddhism Without Beliefs, this book. It's only a very thin book. It's not very big. The title intrigued me. So I took it away and I read it, and it completely blew me apart. And at that point, me and the Friends of the Western Buddhist Order parted ways, because I realized that they were very intellectualizing. There's nothing wrong with them. Just, you know, I'm not dismissing them. They've been around for years. They're brilliant. There's a lot of very cool people who sit with them. But for me, I just suddenly went down this slight thing. And then at the same time as 98, I met a guy called Jeremy, who was he ran a company called Zazen Sacred Icons. Yeah, and he used to sell into a shop, and I knew the two owners of the shop, so I used to hang around at the shop. Basically, they sold me as many Buddhist iconographic stuff as they could sell me. You can see some behind me. And he came and we got chatting, and he ran Smiling Mountain Zen Meditation Group, which was an offshoot of Oxford Zen, which I think is part of the Phoenix Trust. The Phoenix Trust of the people who teach yoga into prisons, who's got Jeremy Irons as one of their patrons. So I started sitting with Oxford Zen, and I sat with them till about 2008. And then I moved to South Wales, which is where I live now. And there's no real groups in South Wales. There's Bristol Soto Zen Dojo. They used to have one in Cardiff, but that's kind of wrapped up. It's very Chan around here, very Chan. There's the Chan Fellowship, overseen by a guy called Eddie Street, who's a psychologist. My wife knows him. But I never sat with Chan, because I was living up in Merthyr Tydfil, which was up in the valleys, and traveling down to Cardiff on a regular basis was, to be honest with you, quite difficult to do. So since then I've kind of sat on my own, Zen wise or Buddhism wise. Now I think I've kind of copied Stephen Batchelor, that I describe myself as sort of like a follower of the Dharma rather than a Buddhist. If I probably
secular rather than rather than fixed.
Because I'm not a member of a group now, you know. Up to 98, 2008, even I would have said I was Zen, because I was a member of Oxford Zen, so I was Zen. But now I'm. But what I found going back to the NLP, one of the things I was always very interested in through sort of the meditation, the philosophy and stuff, was I don't know why this is. I think it's just the way my brain. I think it's just part of my personality, part of my wiring. But I was always quite curious. I've always been interested. I've always asked questions. I've always wondered what's going on. And that's what led me to philosophy and Buddhism and stuff like that. So I found that kind of Zen and NLP, and it kind of took me down this whole route that I'm still doing now, about like what broadly you could call sort of consciousness exploration. You know, sort of you could sort of say you're seeking enlightenment, but once you say you're seeking enlightenment, then enlightenment becomes unattainable, because enlightenment isn't something to be sought. It's not an object. But then you realize you're stuck in the language trap, because we speak English, which is a language that's made up of the subject, verb, object, sentence structure. So you always say, I am doing something, or I am after something. So we then, our very language externalizes enlightenment and makes it a thing to attain. It's a bit like people saying, I need some motivation. A bit like you could pop down the shop and buy a can of motivation and
that's right.
Home, and you know, it's something. It's not something that you are seeking. It's actually very difficult to describe in English what enlightenment actually is, because it's not a thing.
The problem with the word enlightenment is it sounds mystical. It sounds spiritual. It sounds unattainable. And I think a better word for it, and it was a Tibetan who told me, Kalu Rinpoche, who told me, he said it's about being intimate with everything in life. In other words, you're awake to what's going on. And I thought, I was 15 at the time, and it actually just went over my head at the time. But it wasn't until I got older, in my 20s, I realized what he meant by being awake, by being intimate, and about having and Stephen Batchelor echoed this for me when I was reading Batchelor, probably about the same time as you. I'd read Alone.
Alone with Others, the existential
Alone with Others first. That was his first book, I think. And he says it's about having an appropriate response. That's all it's about. It's about being in the moment and having an appropriate response. And this idea of searching for something, I think when you're really like yourself, when you are a seeker, as it were, and you understand how language works, which NLP is brilliant for. And you understand how belief systems can tie you down. You start to realize what really Zen was about, and what the Zen masters were saying. The problem with the way the translations were given were they're too ambiguous, and the language is not the language of the West.
Yeah,
and it's very difficult to get your head around it. And I think if the books had been translated in a cleaner fashion, more Western logic, people in the West would have understood Zen a lot quicker.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm sorry, I've taken over the conversation.
Oh, no.
But I think it's important so people understand, you know, that, and you've experienced it yourself with the FWBO.
Yeah.
Got a group of middle-class people, generally middle-class, and I'm not being funny. You're very rarely
middle-class. I have no issue. I describe myself as a middle-class Buddha. Thank you very much.
So middle-class people who have given up on other religions and have found another religion. And this is the problem. You know, it's getting into people's heads that Buddhism is not a religion. As such, it was never intended to be such a thing. And the ism only appeared I think it was just pre-Victorian. In fact, it was Victorian times when the Buddhism term was coined.
Well, that was sort of the first wave of Western interest, wasn't it?
You
know, because
it was just following the Dharma.
Yeah. And it was, I couldn't speak for the Buddha, or I couldn't speak for Siddhartha, but I wonder, you know, having read a lot of his original texts, whether Buddhism, he would be particularly enamored with the title, because he was always saying, I'm not someone to be followed. I'm pointing you in the direction. I'm not telling you to follow me. So, you know,
and he actually said that in his first address, the turning of the wheel of the Dharma, that you shouldn't go on hearsay, you don't listen to gurus, you find your own path. And then people did the complete opposite, obviously. And actually, in academic terms, they call that normative Buddhism. As you know, I've been sort of digging and delving and doing lots of reading and research into from an academic perspective, looking at what came before the Pali Canon, what was going on in India, you know, pre-written text, because there was nothing written down. 300 years after his death, the first evidence of Buddhism starts arising in written forms, in the leaves of Gandhara, and in the pillars that Ashoka allegedly had put up. And again, that's 300 years after the Buddha's death. That's a long time to pass information down the line. And there was no evidence in the early information. There was no evidence of the Four Noble Truths or the Eightfold Path. In fact, there was no reference made of it. It's called the Atthakavagata Sutta.
It's kind of like, you know what it makes me think of, with sort of an analogy to NLP. Randomly, because this is what we're talking about. NLP, Bandler and Grinder, when they started doing NLP, were just exploring to see what happened. And then it was only when Dilts turned up and he tried to like retroactively develop this model of NLP that then you got like the 4 pillars and stuff like that. And I always think that, you know, NLP Volume 1, which is what, about the 6th or 7th book in the sort of the NLP series, as it were, is sort of the first one where they try and organize it into some meaningful structure. And I think it's that sort of similar thing, is often when you're really at the coal face of exploration, consciousness exploration, knowledge, hunting, it is all very scattergun. And it's only with hindsight that then our brains like order. So we then try and organize it into some form of structure or narrative that then will make some sense to us. So like you say, I think it's like, you often see this with a lot of fields of study, or a lot of, you see it in your own life. You know, stuff happens to you, and then you sort of like post, you know, afterwards, you kind of then make a narrative that you kind of tries to fit together what's happened to you. And it's that narrative, you're talking about sort of therapy, coaching, that sort of thing, is often people who do better just have a better narrative of the same experience. People can make a really negative narrative of the experience that somebody has the same experience of, but they then make a worse narrative. And you'll see people have had, you know, the same traumatic experience, maybe an accident or something like that, and you'll have one person that's doing all right because they've made quite a nice narrative out of it, and another person who's doing really badly, and it's simply they've just got this negative story. And it's and
the other thing is they became these foundations in Buddhism, and as in other religions and other philosophies, become truths. That's where the danger lies, because the Buddha never spoke, as far as we know, never spoke of truth.
Well, I'm not convinced there's anything. I don't. If there is a truth, I'm fairly certain we can't attain it. We can't understand it.
Wow.
If you think about it for a second, we exist for a less than a blink of cosmological time.
We're a process.
Yeah, and
I mean, like you say, whether there is a truth or there isn't a truth, I don't think it really matters. It's about suspending judgment and realizing that you're creating a duality. Truth, non-truth. Well, it doesn't matter. And this is what Zen was trying to say, particularly Dogen and writers like that. But sadly, the translations don't do justice to the depth of the knowledge that some of these people, if you can call it knowledge, because their knowledge, there's another.
It's that deep irony that I remember sitting and I was thinking about this, as you do sit in meditation, and you're meant to be observing thoughts, but occasionally you get carried away with a bit of thinking. You can't help yourself. And I was thinking about
your brain thinks,
and I burst out laughing because I was sat there going, right, so duality bad, non-duality good, and then I suddenly went, I've just created a duality. Because I'm now saying non-duality is a good
regress.
Yeah, and you end up in that turtles all the way down thing, don't you? Of like you say, infinite regress. And I remember just bursting out laughing, and it was one of those sort of like moments of spontaneous, sort of satire, sort of Kensho, only lasted a few seconds, which is what it's meant to be. And then that's when you start to reckon, and then that's when I started thinking about, like as you were saying, and this is where the NLP really fits with sort of the Buddhist philosophy, is the map is not the territory, which obviously we know NLP stole anyway, because they stole it from Kaczynski. But the map is not the territory. We make these maps and models to allow us to navigate the world, but they are not the territory. But yet the confusion comes when we think they are the territory, and therefore we expect the world to act in a certain way, and when that world doesn't act in the way we expect it to, we get upset and angry and depressed and stressed and that sort of thing. And actually to me, what it seems like a lot of the Zen stuff, a lot of the Buddhism stuff is about accepting the world. It's about accepting the world as it is. It's about reducing, as you say, those filters, those expectations, those judgments. We've got this ghost of expectation on our shoulder that is always whispering to us about how things, and you see it a lot. You see it all Facebook. Go on social media, for goodness sake, and you see everyone's angry on there because everybody is moaning because the world doesn't work the way they think it should work. Like, who made you the expert? But it's about, if you accept it, and you've seen it a lot with COVID, and understand this is not, in fact, in any way, shape or form, it's human nature to act like this. So it's not a criticism to say that people are doing this. I've done it, and I've been doing this stuff for 25 years, and I've still fallen into the trap. So, I'm a hypocrite if I'm...
But it's about recognition of the reactions that we have, the conditioned reactions we have that causes the problem. And this is what I say on my meditation group. The whole idea of it is we're not trying to achieve anything other than being in the present moment, which allows in daily life to spot when the ambushes are happening, rather than just suddenly get ambushed and go, oh, my life is shit, blah, blah, blah. You go, hang on, a series of events are happening. There's a process going on around me. Oh, I see. I'm about to have a reaction to this. Okay, I'll be able to stop that because I'll just let it go. Because ultimately, we're driven by our thoughts. And when people start thinking thoughts are real and have concrete existence, that's where the problem lies. They're just a thought. And it's a bit of an epiphany I've had over the past 4 months. And if you want to call it a Kensho or Satori or whatever, is I came to the realization that it's dogmas and belief systems that cause a problem. Now, I first encountered this, and I want you to talk about this fundamentally, so I'm trying to drive the conversation in that direction. I remember Bandler talking about, we were talking about beliefs, and when I did my training the trainer, I did a thing on beliefs. I split the audience up into 2 groups. I had my little group who I'd been working with, who were the believers, and then we had the rest, which were, and I told them they were non-believers because my groups, they're all going boo. So we had two like, it was working in part, it was positive and negative anchors, there was lots of stuff going on. And Bandler afterwards came up to me and he said, I like that stuff on beliefs, but what are your beliefs? I said, well, to be honest, I don't really have any beliefs as such. At least I don't think I do. none that actually caused me any problem. And he said, oh, okay. He said, that's why I created presuppositions.
Yeah.
And I was like, and then it sort of twigged. I thought, that's why I like NLP, because they're not saying this is a truth. This is not a truth. It was like, well, you can have some beliefs, but they're pretty flexible. So the map is not this is why I'm talking about, because you said the map is not the territory. Now, I know some people who slavishly attach themselves to that thing. And I said, no, it's a presupposition. We're going to presuppose it's true just because at the moment it suits our model and it's perfect. And it seems to work in most cases. So that's a useful belief. It's when people get trapped by dogmatic beliefs. Yeah, and that includes atheists, because they're just as bad.
Oh.
You know,
some of them are worse than the religious fanatics.
Well, if you want to make somebody a religious fanatic, get an atheist, because they're already using the model. Yeah. And they're totally convinced that they're right. Just exactly the same as the Christian is totally convinced they're right. And you just go, you're all mad. Yeah. This is what causes the problem.
This is why I'm a raging and proud militant agnostic. I'm a fundamentalist agnostic.
And you want to drop that belief in?
Yeah. So,
but what I like though about NLP, and it fits in with a lot of the stuff I've been doing recently, is it gives you tools, practical tools, to deal with the day-to-day reactive impulses that you're going to have in a very concrete way. Yeah. Unlike most other systems. Now, I'm not saying NLP is the best, because when I'm working with people, I'll draw from psychiatry, psychology, philosophy, storytelling, drama, martial arts. Do you know what I'm saying? So it's about having that open attitude, which is what we talked about right at the beginning. You go into something, you go, oh, I'll go with the flow. And can I adapt? Can I tweak? It's what you did when we first did the training together. I sat watching and I thought, yeah, I'm going to make a cup of tea now. It's in safe hands. He'll go off and he'll do shit and then bring him back on focus.
Well, I think it's important actually at this point to make a very quick and brief distinction about NLP, and which will sort of take me onto the belief thing that you were just talking about. And that is when you and I talk about NLP, it's important to understand we are talking about Bandlerite NLP. And the reason I'm saying this is it's not just different organizations. It is very, very different interpretations about what can and cannot be done with neuro-linguistic programming. As you say, some people treat NLP as if it's a fixed thing that exists. And one of the key things I always say on my trainings is NLP doesn't exist. You know, it's like Bandler jokes. I don't have a single qualification in NLP.
Yeah. I asked him who gave me certificate.
Yeah.
I asked him that at my practice. I said, who gave me your certificate? And he goes, good point.
And and the reason I say this is because Bandler is incredibly influenced by a guy, you know this, I'm talking to the audience, not to you. Incredibly influenced by a guy called Robert Anton Wilson. And Robert Anton Wilson, I got into good old Bob through NLP. And then he had a link to him on his website. I was on Bandler's website in like 2000, 99, 2000, whenever I first started into it. And I got into I've got the Luminasis trilogy, which was his big famous book. And this is a thing that Bob Wilson is really on about, is the whole maybe logic thing. And in fact, he did a documentary called Maybe Logic. Yeah. And that was this whole thing about, you know, militant agnosticism is, and he's very, and this opened up a real door to me getting into Robert Anton Wilson, because then I started getting into things that are considered somewhat questionable by people who don't understand it, like occultism and magic with a K,
Crowley,
and that sort of Crowley. Yeah. And one of the things that really struck me, because from my point of view, and this I think might be a bit of a daft thing to say, but that shyness, insecurity that I had at a very early age has done me a lot of favors, weirdly, because I would always look around and I was unsure about my own personal beliefs, because I would be like, well, that person really believes that fully. Yeah, I don't agree with them, but what makes them, because I was insecure, I didn't go, well, they're just wrong, like a lot of people do. I would question it. I would go, well, what is it that makes them really convinced that is true when I'm not convinced with them? So I kind of sort of, through my own natural insecurities and sort of shyness, that's, I think, what developed my curiosity and things like that. So
Alan Watts, The Wisdom of Insecurity.
Exactly. I love a bit of Alan Watts. Although he wasn't a big meditator. He wasn't a big fan.
Do you know what? I don't think it's absolute. I'm gonna say something.
Sacrilege.
I don't think it's absolute, because I'm doing something completely different, and I've had completely things have cleared up for me far quicker over the past 4 months, because I've been
you've taken out cream, Bob. That's what it is. That's what's cleared up.
And and
Piro cream.
Although I still teach meditation, I think it's a useful tool. It didn't serve the function I thought it would. And I'm using a completely different method, if you want to call it that. The method of no method, as Zen call it. And I remember, Shunryu Suzuki, I think, walks into a Zen door, looks at everybody meditating, facing the wall, and bursts out laughing and says, "It's useless." Kenneth Roshi said that to me at Throstle Hall Priory. She said, I don't know why you're all meditating. It's a useless thing to do. And I understood what she meant. I understand now what she meant. Because people are so earnest about it. The way they do it, I've got to do it like this. This is the problem. You're getting wrapped up. Just sit. Sit.
Well, it's like, who was it that was it on a prac that we ran together about that guy that came in? He was asking me, he did speak like this. It's a bit unfair. He was very adenoid. And he went, "Oh, Matt, I was doing the such and such technique the other day, and I missed out step 7." And I was a bit like, "Is there 7 steps to it? I don't know." And I went, "Oh, okay." And he went, "But did I do it wrong?" And I went, "Well, how did the client respond? Did they get a positive result from it?" And he went, "Oh, yes, they seem to." And I went, "Well, there you go. Then you did it right." And he went, but I missed out step 7. And he was obsessed with doing the process as opposed to understanding which is what, as a complete jump into the world of cybernetics, is something that Anthony Stafford Beers talks about, which is the purpose of the system is what it does. And often we get wrapped up in this doing the system for the system's sake. Because I think it was Stafford Beers, or was it Tony Butt, someone like that. And they said the number one purpose of any system, and we see this in religion, politics, organization. I do a lot of organizational change work, and it is the biggest bugbear of what I do. In our personal philosophy, our personal psychology, our sense of self, the number one purpose of any system is to maintain the system. That's the thing. That's why politics never changes. That's why religion's still around, even though science has been chipping away at it for so many years. Although actually the whole religion science thing is actually a completely massively false dichotomy set up largely by atheists, setting the straw man argument to attack organized religion. But we can't get into that today because I don't think we've got enough
time. We are running out of time. We've got about 10 minutes for this one, but we'll carry on.
I would avoid the somewhat possibly controversial argument that atheists set up an awful lot of religious straw men to attack to support their beliefs about atheism. But it's going back to that, and the point I was very slowly getting to, was when I got Robert Anton Wilson spoke about how beliefs are sneaky, because if you say you don't believe in anything, you say, "Oh, truly believe that, do you?" And you go, "Oh, yes." And then, because beliefs, so he started using the word suspicions. I suspect that, because he found that suspect was a broader word that allowed him to adjust what he was suspecting without falling into the belief trap.
Well, that's why he writes his books in E prime most of the time, which is something that we could spend a whole hour talking about E prime. But the interesting thing about E prime is the Greek philosopher Pyrrho was using that methodology 2,500 years ago in Greece, and he was shot down in flames. Because whenever you have a problem in your head with belief systems, he said you argue with yourself. You have a conversation with yourself and say, "It appears to me that Mozart plays great music."
Exactly. It's well, like you say, Pyrrho was having the problem, I'm guessing, because Aristotelian logic was and still is at the time the prevailing model of understanding.
Aristotle is responsible for all sorts of nonsense,
because it was for those of you that don't know, Aristotle's argument was the is of identity, where you basically bundle things. And it works fine with this is an apple, this isn't an apple. But once you start going, this is a sound belief, this isn't a sound belief, that's when it starts to crumble. Now, I remember my friend joking about it, and I said about maybe being, I said, the world would be a better place if we all said maybe more often. And he then immediately played devil's advocate and said, well, you know, when you go to the doctor, you want certainty about the fix. You don't want them going, oh, well, maybe this. And he was being a bit sarcastic and a bit jokey about it. And or, you know, when the plumber comes around, he goes, oh, it might be this, it might be that. And I was a bit like, yeah, but actually the point you're making is one, it's context relevant. There are some things we were fairly certain about. You know, I think it's, you know, Wilson talks about the scale of I love the scale of probability of 0 to 10, where 10 is completely probable, 100% it's going to happen, and 0 is it's not going to happen, it's nonsense. And you know, most things I could say 99.999 or 9.9999 reoccurring. I'm fairly certain the sun is going to come up tomorrow.
Yeah. So because that's what Pyrrha would call an evident.
Yeah.
An evident thing. It's when you do it with non-evident things. It's like it's evident from appearances that if I drop an apple, it will go to the floor, and we give it a name. We call it, oh, that's gravity. What's non-evident is how gravity works. Yeah. You can never say, oh, I know how that works. So it's like you say, it's context related. It's is this useful at this particular time? And good physicists worth their salt, not the sort of scientism. People like Brian Cox will say we have two models of gravity. You know, the quantum model developed by Einstein. I think it was Einstein. I'm not a physicist. Please don't write in. And the Newtonian model of gravity. They actually contradict each other, but they both work. They work. So which one's right and which one's wrong? Well, we don't know. It doesn't matter. This is what Zen was. Coming back to Zen, this is what Zen was about. There is no hard truth. It just is what it is. You have an appropriate response to whatever's going on at the time. And it's like light behaves as both a particle and a wave. And it was like, that's impossible because they were thinking in Aristotelian terms. It has to be. No, it doesn't. It can be, as Anton Wilson always pointed out. Yeah, maybe.
There's a certain arrogance to our perception of the world that causes all our problems, that we know what is. So we've made up a term. We've observed something and given it a label. And the minute we've given it a label, because we are language-based creatures, we think and act in language. So the minute we give something a label, it poof, creates it into reality, you know, as if by magic. This is why Alan Moore, oh goodness me, Alan Moore, suddenly, he was a comic book writer, and he did like Watchmen and From Hell, absolutely amazing guy. And also, and in the age of 40, he suddenly announced he was a magician, because he realized that language is what creates reality. And he was a wordsmith, he lived in language. So he suddenly decided he was a magician and reinvented himself as a magician.
And what was Richard Bandler's first book? Got Out of Magic, part 1 and 2. And it's got a wizard on the cover.
It all comes back.
Language.
But then you've got...
I know you're talking about Alan Moore, but have you listened to any Andrew Austin stuff? Now, Andy
Not
Austin,
much. I've got his...
Andy Austin, Magic and Metaphors.
I've got his Rainbow Machine, but he's very influenced by the same sort of things. He was very into,
he's really been getting shot down by the NLP community, and he's a genius. He wrote a book called The Rainbow Machine.
Yeah, which I've got. Yeah, it's a really good.
Yeah, that's book. Andy Austin.
Because
have a look at his recent stuff on metaphor and magic.
The first thing I saw of Andy, which always made me laugh, the first pick, because he's been around for donkey's years. So when I go into NLP and I was searching on the internet back in the late 90s, all that sort of stuff, he was one of the first people that I came across. And I remember he was posing on a desk like that. And on the desk, very subtly placed for people who notice things, was Magic Book 4 by Aleister Crowley. And it was just there. And I was like, yeah, you get this, don't you? That magic is not about magic, it's about, well, what did Crowley say? You know, magic is brain change willed, or, you know, changing things in term of your will. So, you know, what is that if it's not, you know, therapy, philosophy? It's about just making the world the way you want it to be, you know, changing in accordance with your will. It's not about conjuring up demons. That's all metaphor. Or maybe it isn't, we don't know. It'd be cool if there was demons, wouldn't it? And ghosts and that sort of stuff would be brilliant. You know,
Well, I've met a few patients with demons, so
if I could conjure up a demon. Well, it's what Grant Morrison talks about. You know, he was a bit of a protege of Alan Moore before they fell out. He did The Invisibles, which is a really big comic book series, and that's all about magic and language. And he's very into NLP and magic stuff. And he talks about that. About he got an abscess on the back of his ear, and he manifested it into an entity, and then made a bargain with the entity to make it go away. And he got better, and it was like, because he understood the magic. Because this is a thing. So I'm crawling towards slowly. Is one of the things that once I got into the interest in magic, one of the things I came across very interestingly was something called chaos magic, which was Alan Moore's not a fan of chaos magic at all. He doesn't like. He calls it Thatcherite magic, because it's all Austin Osman Spare and using sigils to create things. It's a bit like who were those Buddhists that chant for Porsches?
What the Nichiren?
That's it. Yeah. It's fine having lots of stuff as long as you're not attached to it. I kind of like that philosophy. But you can have a Porsche. It's fine. You can have a Porsche. Just don't be attached to the Porsche. Yeah. But yeah, so Alan Moore, being a bit of a lefty socialist that he isn't the biggest fan of chaos magic, because he calls it Thatcherite magic, because it developed very much, started in the 70s but developed very much in the 80s. But they talk about chaos magic, they talk about beliefs as a thing that you sort of use when they're useful. So if it is useful for you to believe in this at this moment in time, you believe in it. But the minute it is not useful for you to believe in that, you cast that belief aside. And it reminded me very much of when I saw Brian Cox doing an interview about talking about Newtonian versus quantum gravity. Now, apparently, and I'm no physicist, I'm parroting probably badly what Brian Cox said to make a point, is, so any physicists watching this, please don't write angry things in the comments. I'm making very aware of my ignorance. But to create a rocket ship to get us to the moon, they use the Newtonian model because it's force. So they have to work out the amount of force. The quantum model wouldn't work to take a rocket off. So I thought, that's very chaos magic-y, because it's about using a belief in Newtonian. You know, what's a belief if it's not a model of the world? A belief in Newtonian gravity at that moment in time, because that belief is useful. But if you turn around and tell a physicist that they believe in Newtonian gravity, because you're using a different word, you're daring to use the word belief, which is a religious thing, as opposed to model, which is a scientific thing, straight away you're going to get, that friction immediately. But it's all about maps and models and beliefs, and it's acknowledging that we don't know anything. And the minute you acknowledge you don't know anything, you are free to choose whatever map, model, belief, or whatever works for you at that moment in time. Theoretically, it's simple to explain. To be fair, quite hard to put into practice.
Yeah, and it's a good point at which to conclude the discussion, and we can pick it up again for part 2 and talk a little bit more, I think, about obviously your love of comic book authors.
Before it becomes trendy,
magic. I think magic and Crowley, because there's a lot of misconceptions about Crowley. 666, the Beast, and all that nonsense. I lived at 664. I was next door to the Beast,
the neighbor of the Beast.
Yeah, and I was going to come out with a story about Tony Iommi, but we'll save that for the guitarist from Black Sabbath. But I'll tell you about that.
I could tell you a story about Jason Bonham, who's the son of John Bonham, but I probably shouldn't do it on the podcast.
And we'll do that on the podcast, I think. So I just want to say thanks very much, Matt.
No worries.
It's been a pleasure, as always, talking to you. I will catch up and continue with this in part 2, coming soon. In the meantime, please, guys, like the post, write some comments, negative or positive, but please don't post soft porn, whoever you are. And we'll get links, nonsense, and then we just report you, and we just send, and you get banned from YouTube. So please keep it clean, keep it tidy, and ask some questions, because Matt, I'd love to come on and answer about NLP, about occultism, about magic, about comic books, about Bonham, about living in Monmouth, and doing his shopping over the river at Lidl, which is like a war zone. So thanks very much, Matt.
No worries, Bob. Thanks for having me on.
No, pleasure, as always. you.